Well, good morning and welcome again. Nice to see you again. We are starting week 2 of In the Beginning today. Last week, if you were here, we talked about how the Big Bang and the biblical worldview of creation simply cannot actually both be true. They could certainly both be false, but they cannot both be true simply because the orders are wrong. So you can check that all out from last week. This week, I've just titled the discussion, Darwin's Deception. Darwin's Deception. I already got some hate mail for that one, and I'm sure you can guess what I'm going to be talking about. Again, last week I showed how these models both cannot be true, and again today I'm going to show that in a particular section of creation. Also, last week I reminded you that science is not a person or a thing. It's actually a process by which we determine truth. And we use the scientific method, which is how that's done, and we'll be using it again today. Science is not something out there that is all-knowing. It's a process by which we determine truth. So today, I have a lot to discuss, so I might go a little fast. You can always rewatch the video later on our website, or actually download my notes, in which I will list a lot of my references, so you can do studying on your own. So check out my notes, because today, this is a topic that's like this big, and I can only tell you this much, right? So there's just so much to it. All right. So we're going to be examining one of the major differences between the Big Bang and the creation account. So first, remember in the scientific method, we have an observation. An observation. So what is it that we see that is interesting? Well, this observation is that there is life on this planet, and it exists in many different forms. I totally forgot I was going to control my slides today. Sorry. The second is the question. The question. Why does life exist? And why does it exist as it currently does? All right. And next comes the hypothesis. The hypothesis, the possible explanation for what it is that we see today. And so first we'll do the creation account. The creation account. Now, the creation account we find in the book of Genesis in the Bible. And it was written by Moses around 1400 BC. And let's pick it up. Last week I covered most of it. Day 1 was God created light and darkness, separated light from darkness. Day 2 was the sky. He separated the waters from the waters. Day 3 was the land, the seas, and plants. Day 4 was the sun, moon, and stars, and again, that was where kind of the big difference between the Big Bang and the creation account is plants and earth came first, then sun, moon, and stars in the creation account, totally opposite of the Big Bang. And finally, starting in verse 20, we'll talk about how it is that life, according to the creation account, came to be. How is it that life came to be as we see it today? Chapter 1 in Genesis, verse 20, it says, "And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the water teems, and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, and said, be fruitful, and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, the wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the air, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female. He created them. And skipping ahead to verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. So basically the summary of the creation account, the hypothesis for how all things came to be is that God made all the living creatures fully formed according to their kind, including humans, which were created separately from the animals and were supposed to rule over the animals. Now, let's get on to the evolution hypothesis. On November 24th, 1859, Charles Darwin published his famous On the Origin of Species. I actually have a real copy of this, in which he described his idea of how all this came to be, how the variety, especially of animals, came to be. And of course, today, it is the prevailing theory all over the world. This is basically what most people believe, even many Bible-believing Christians, which is why I'm talking to you about it today. Let's read from his book. In the introduction, on page 7, he actually explains basically the summary of his hypothesis. It says, this is Darwin, "I am fully convinced that species are not immutable," which means unchanging, "but that those belonging to what are called the same genera, or kind, are lineal descendants of some other and generally extinct species, in the same manner as the acknowledged varieties of any one species are the descendants of that species. Furthermore, I am convinced that natural selection has been the most important but not the exclusive means of modification." In less technical speak, what he's basically saying is he's convinced that everything that we see today, all the various kinds of living animals, came from other kinds of living creatures that are now extinct. Just as, say, the varieties of various types of dog came from the dog family. He thinks it works the same way that dogs came from another kind of creature altogether and so on. You know it. You taught this in school. You understand it. And of course, the way this happened is through slight modifications and natural selection. So there you have it. Those are the two theories. Creation. All kinds of living things were created by God, fully formed, able to reproduce according to their kind. Evolution. All kinds of living things evolved from one living thing through gradual modification and natural selection. So, and of course, the creation model says it happened in 2 days, and the evolution model says it happened over billions and billions of years. So which one is true? What do we see today? Well, first, let me give you a quick definition. What is a kind? A kind. Animals and plants of the same kind can mate and reproduce offspring. The scientific term is genus. So basically, like any two dogs can reproduce another dog, but a dog and a cat cannot produce anything. So a kind is simply any two, a type of animal, a genus, a kind. All right, so we have two hypotheses that try to explain why we have different kinds of living things on this planet. And in order to test a hypothesis, you have to have a testable prediction. A testable prediction. So evolution has a few of these. An evolution testable prediction number 1 would be if evolution is true. If evolution is true, all living things share a common ancestor, and all living things should basically be made of the same stuff. Makes sense? They all came from the same living thing, should be made of the same stuff. So what is it that we see? What's the observation? All living things are made of the same stuff. Carbon, cells, DNA, proteins, etc. Evolution must be true. Wait a minute, let's check what the other hypothesis says. Creation testable prediction number 1. If creation is true and all living things share a common designer, all living things should basically be made of the same stuff. What do we see? All living things are made of the same stuff. Carbon, cells, DNA, proteins, etc. This is actually one of those arguments that you'll hear often from the evolution side of the debate is that, this is, I actually read a website one time based solely on the idea of evolution. Everything should be made of the same thing. It's like, common designer would do the same thing, right? Anyway, so what this actually is non-conclusive. Non-conclusive. It ultimately equates to starting with what we see and working backwards and making your theory fit. That's really what that is. So that whole argument, if anyone ever tries to bring that up for you, is non-conclusive. It works for both hypotheses. So let's look at a testable prediction that does not work backwards. Testable prediction number 2, fossils, evidence of the past. Fossils are basically the bones or the imprints of dead animals and plants that turned into rock through the known process of fossilization, which actually doesn't take as long as you might think, which I'll talk about next week. Now, if the evolution model is correct, so here's the testable prediction. This is what evolution predicts should be. If evolution, the model, is correct, we should see, quote, innumerable transitional forms embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth. That's straight from Darwin's Origin of Species. If the creation account is correct, all fossils should be of distinct plants and animals completely formed with no transitions in between. Makes sense? Both of those hypotheses should result in those two different things. So what is it that we find? Well, the fossil record is full of distinct plants and animals completely formed with no transitions in between. To date, of the millions of fossils that have been collected all over the entire globe, not a single undisputed transitional form has been found. Now, of course, there are a handful of claimed transitional forms, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But even if all of the ones that they claim are transitional actually are, there's so few. If Darwin's theory is correct, there should be more transitions than there are completions. The number of transitional forms are like a handful compared to an ocean's worth of fossils that are out there. So either way, the fossil record pretty much does not support evolution. Darwin even recognized this as a challenge back in his day. His explanation back in 1859 was basically that not enough fossils have been collected, and then as the years go on, as we keep collecting more fossils, we're surely going to find some of these transitions. Now it's 150 years later, plus millions and millions of fossils, and still nothing. Now it would seem that this one piece of evidence would be conclusive in favor of creation, right? But unfortunately, it actually never will be. Because until we can assuredly say that we have collected all of the fossils that have ever existed, will exist, that all of them, and shown that none of them are actually transitions, we can never say without a doubt 100% that there are no transitions in the fossil record. And that is the hope that evolutionists hold on to, just like those looking for life outside of Earth. We simply haven't found it yet. This is called a non-falsifiable. It's a question that can never actually be conclusively answered because we will never exhaust all of the possibilities. In fact, most of the questions surrounding this particular debate are that way, which means that really we're dealing with more of less science and more about faith. It's about what we believe. You see, because for something to be scientific, rather than philosophical, a hypothesis or theory, it has to be falsifiable. You have to be able to prove that it's false to actually know if it's actually true. You have to be able to prove it false to show that it's really true. And these things are not falsifiable. Here's a good example. Let's say you cannot conclusively say that there's no such thing as a purple cow. There's no such thing as a purple cow. In order to actually say that 100% absolutely, you would have to look at every single cow that ever existed, currently exists, or ever will exist, and watch and look at every single one of them to show that not a single one of them is purple. Since that is impossible, you cannot say beyond any possibility that there's no such thing as a purple cow. Basically, you have to believe that there's no such thing as a purple cow based upon the observations you have already made. The more cows you see that are not purple may increase the probability that there are no purple cows, but it does not rule out the absolute possibility. All right. So when it comes to these two origins of accounts, both are non-falsifiable. Both. Because we are unable to observe all of time and all of the fossils in existence to conclusively show whether or not any transitions actually do exist anywhere. So on both sides of this argument, we are simply going on faith. It's a belief. In creation, we base our belief off of God's word and the observable evidence the fossil record so far shows that creation is true. Evolutionists believe that everything came from bacteria, and the fossil record will someday show that that is true. It really all comes down to probabilities. Probabilities. In fact, everything that we know, everything that we believe, we really don't know or believe for certain. That's a big philosophical topic, but basically it all comes down to probabilities. If there's a 1 in a gazillion chance of something, it's pretty much impossible, right, in our minds. Anyway, so how probabilities work, this is a little bit technical. As the sample size from a fixed source increases without the desired result, the probability of the desired result decreases. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a box, yay big or so, and you can't see inside of it, but inside of it you know it's full of coins. Nickels, dimes, it's full of American currency coins. Now, you don't know the composition. You just know that there's coins in there because you pulled one out and found one. Now, let's say you hypothesize, at not being able to see in there, that it's an even mixture of quarters and nickels and dimes and pennies. It seems like a reasonable assumption, right? But then you start pulling coins out. Penny, 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 penny. Just a few pennies, you might just be kind of lucky. Just happen to pull out only pennies. But let's say that the box, it's only so big because it can only hold, say, several hundred pennies. What if you pull out 300 pennies in a row? What does that do? That decreases the probability that there's any other kind of coin in there. Because all that we keep pulling out are pennies. Or you're just really, really lucky and all that's left in there is all the other coins. Follow me? So that's how probabilities work. All right, I see some blank stares out there. I'll move on. This is basically what we see in the fossil record. In Darwin's day, there were not that many fossils. There weren't that many. So it could be reasonably said that we simply haven't found these other kind yet. But now, 150 years later, millions and millions and millions of fossils that are not transitional, the probabilities have decreased significantly. Assuming that they're still out there, again, is like assuming that all you did was pull out all the pennies first and all that's left are every other kind of coin. Follow? All right. So speaking of probabilities, what do you think the probability is that gradual modifications from one kind of animal into another is actually even physically possible? Is this physically possible? For that, we have to look into the cell. The cell. In Darwin's day, this is what a cell looked like. In fact, here's a quote. It says, in Darwin's day, a cell was a structure of exaggerated importance with mysterious powers surrounded by the simplest form of organic life, which is a microscopic lump of jelly-like substance that is destitute of texture and destitute of organs with no trace of organization. So basically, back in Darwin's day, a cell was this mysterious ball of goo that somehow makes up all of life. This is what they knew at the time. Effectively, like little pieces of Play-Doh, if you think about it. And so if you think of the cell as like little pieces of Play-Doh, it's not a far jump to think, well, if I mush around the Play-Doh a little bit, I can turn a fin into a leg. Because you can do that. My kids can do that, right? But in the time since Darwin, we have discovered a world that is beyond most of our imagination. In fact, I want you to show that cool video.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a two-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
This is absolutely mind-boggling to perceive at this scale of size such a finely tuned apparatus, a device that bears the marks of intelligent design and manufacture. And we have the details of an immensely complex molecular realm of genetic information processing. And it's exactly this new realm of molecular genetics where we see the most compelling evidence of design on the Earth.
Microscopic lump of jelly-like substance that is destitute of texture and destitute of organs with no trace of organization. Now, I'm not going to get into how life began from nothing because I don't have time today. And in fact, Darwin actually never talked about it. That wasn't his question. But hopefully you can see from that a cell is anything but simple. And that's the simplest kind of life that we have. You can come to your own conclusions on whether that was design or accidental. However, it got there. Now that we can see it and we know how it works, the video that showed you this so important process, which is the DNA, how the DNA acts as the blueprint of life and how everything comes off the DNA. Now, I did some pretty deep research, made my brain explode over the last few weeks on how it is DNA turns into you and me. How does that work? And I do not have time to go into crazy detail, but I'm going to go through really quick so I can give you a quick example of what are the probabilities that through that process, goo could become you. All right, so let's go through this really quickly. If your brain checks out, that's okay. You can read it in my notes. All right, first of all, 2 nucleotides equals 1 DNA pair. Nucleotides are those little things, and so 2 of them make a DNA pair. 3 pairs of DNA create a codon, so 3 of them create a codon. 1 codon is equivalent to 1 of the amino acids. So you saw in that video how the 3 went up and the 1 little thing came off. That was an amino acid. 3, the codon represents an amino acid, and there are 21 possible amino acids that the body can produce. So a codon represents 1 of 21 possible amino acids. Hundreds of specifically ordered amino acids create a protein. Hundreds to thousands of these amino acids create a protein, and they have to be in a specific order. Thousands of specified proteins create a single cell. Specified, they're not all the same. Specified proteins. And trillions of specified cells create a living organism. Your body is made up of trillions of very specified cells. To try to understand this better, let's compare this to a library full of books. Our English language letters could coincide with said amino acids. So imagine a letter, there's 26 letters in the English alphabet, there's 21 amino acids, so you could think of our alphabet as being similar to the amino acids. Now, a specifically ordered letters make what? A word. Just like specifically ordered amino acids make a protein. And it's not just any order of letters that make a word. It has to be specific, right? It works the same way in a protein. Specifically ordered words make a sentence, which could be equal to a set of proteins that perform a certain kind of function. And thousands of specifically ordered sentences make a book with a specified author and title, which could be kind of like a specified single cell. All of the books by said author could equal a specific organ in the body, like the liver or the skin, and the whole library or the whole bookstore could be representative of your body. Now, while Darwin did not know about DNA, modern scientists do and have tried to adapt his theory into the modern age in what is called neo-Darwinism, which basically says that the mechanism for the gradual changes comes in the form of copy errors and mutations at the DNA level. Basically, it'd be kind of be like typos in the book, okay? So what this is analogous to saying is that given enough random typos and enough time that the Lord of the Rings series could become the Harry Potter series. Just through random typos, okay? This is what they say, all right? But the catch is, here's the catch. Every single typo, because of natural selection, every single typo cannot make a word that's gibberish. It has to make the whole series better somehow. Every single typo has to make the whole series better, or it gets thrown away and starts over. That's what natural selection is. A change has to be beneficial for natural selection to happen. So that means that every single typo would have to result in a book series that still makes complete sense at every level, all the way down to the individual letters. Now, to put this into even more perspective, some scientists have done tests to see how likely it is, just how likely is it that a random mutation can create just a single functioning protein. Remember, protein's a string of those amino acids, kind of like one of our words. In our library analogy, the chances that a random letter, it would be the same thing as that chances that a random letter in a single word would still produce a meaningful word. Because remember, just like not all letters combine to make a word, not all amino acids combine to make a protein. So given a protein of only 150 amino acids, which is actually a very small protein, scientists have done experiments and calculated that the chance that a random swapping of any of the amino acids at the DNA level could produce a functioning protein, so from a non-functioning to a functioning protein, is 1 chance in 10 to the 74th power. That's 10 with 74 zeros after it. Back to our analogy, if those are the chances that a single typo will even make a single intelligible word, what do you think the chances are of all the books by Joel Osteen turning into all the books by John Grisham through random typo changes over time? Pretty slim. Anyway, you get the picture. Obviously, we can't prove that this never happened. Again, it's a non-falsifiable. But just for perspective, scientists also calculate that there are a total of 10 to the 65th power atoms in the entire universe, which means you have a better chance of picking a single needle atom, per se, out of the haystack of the universe than you do of creating a single functioning protein from a mutation. It's kind of like that scene in Dumb and Dumber. So you're telling me there's a chance? It's one in a lot, but it is a chance. All right. That's just for one protein. That's not for the millions that are required to make up your body and the different organs and the symmetry and the order and all that kind of thing. So anyway, you can draw your own conclusions. Now, if you ever quote that analogy to an evolution believer, they will likely retort that something about observed natural selection, Darwin's finches, beetle radiation, something like that. And it's true, we do observe changes. I mean, look at us. We don't all look exactly the same, right? But that's called microevolution or adaptation. In other words, your DNA, as it is, has natural variation in it. And so that's why we can see all different kinds of dogs, all different kinds of people, and so on and so forth. But what it doesn't do is change a dog into a cow, or a finch into a toucan, into a lizard, or something like that. That's called macroevolution. Macroevolution. Macroevolution is the process that evolutionists believe happened, although there is no observational evidence for it, and there's not even really a good theory of how additional DNA is added. How does that work? I actually did some research on some pro-evolution sites to try to see what their explanation was. I was curious. And the best I could find was on the University of California at Berkeley site, which is totally devoted to evolution. It's actually evolution.berkeley. And after several pages of explaining this, how, finches and microevolution and the genes flow and all that kind of stuff, they had a page that showed this picture. This picture. And this is the quote right underneath it. A process like mutation might seem too small scale to influence a pattern as amazing as the beetle radiation or as large as the difference between dogs and pine trees, but it's not. Life on Earth has been accumulating mutations and passing them through the filter of natural selection for 3.8 billion years. More than enough time for evolutionary processes to produce its grand history. Now, if that's not an I believe button, I don't know what is. This is their explanation. All of the stuff we observe on the micro scale, if given enough time, will certainly produce what we see, even though we don't know how, even though we've never seen it, even though the probabilities are ridiculous, but we still believe it. It's basically the same thing that Darwin did in his book. If you've ever looked at this stuff or watched some of these videos or read about this, you know about this quote. This is from Darwin's book. It says, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." So he predicted that, if we found this, if we found these probabilities, if we could show that this really wasn't possible, my theory would break down. And you would think that science so far has proven that, but this is what he said, the next sentence. He says, "But I can find out no such case." In other words, I doubt that will ever happen, and I'm sticking to it. Same thing they do today. They are saying as the probability approaches 0, just hold on tighter. Now, I could go on and on and on and on and on and on and on about these things. I could talk about irreducible complexity, the origin of the first life, the myth of DNA similarities, the lie of junk DNA, the lie of whale evolution. They think whales evolved from bear-like things, land animals to... Anyway. The lie of horse evolution, vestigial organs, embryology, and so much more. This is, like I said, this is a topic that's like this big, and I had to try to put it out in very small doses. I do not simply have time. So what I am going to cover a little bit is the perpetuated lie of the ape to man evolution, and then something you probably won't believe. All right, here's a quick history of the missing link, okay? Shifting gears here. Talked about a cell, talked about fossils, now I'm talking about ape to man. All right, Nebraska man. Evidence used in the Scopes monkey trial in 1925, you've heard of that. Drawing depicts a Nebraska man and his wife. The actual fossil this picture was drawn from was the tooth of a pig. They took a tooth and they made up all that other stuff. All right, moving on. Piltdown man. Piltdown man, found in 1912, used to teach evolution for over 50 years, taught in grade school all the way up to college. People wrote dissertations on this to get their doctorate. Turns out it was a fraud, a known fraud. It was actually human skull with part of an ape's jaw. The teeth were filed down, treated with acid to fake the age. It's a known fraud. Neanderthal man. This is the one see on Geico commercials. Turns out this guy, Neanderthal man, well, you know what? He actually is just a man, fully human. He just had old age and rickets. He was kind of bent over. And there are people that actually look this way today. It's a natural part of our DNA to look that way. Java man. Well, the only thing that was found was a skull cap, 3 teeth and a femur. That's it. The discoverer later admitted that he had combined a human skull with parts of a femoral bone of a giant gibbon, which is a kind of monkey. A false fraud, a fake. Still taught, still used in the argument against us. All right, moving on. Ramapithecus. Say that 5 times real fast. Ramapithecus. Included in millions of textbooks. All that it's based upon is some teeth and jaw remnants. That's it. Just some teeth, little piece of teeth and jaw. I think that's in the picture. And these are the pictures they draw. They consider him the first upright walking humanoid or whatever. Turns out it's just an orangutan. 1982 proved that these jawbone pieces were actually from an extinct orangutan, still used, still taught today. And then finally, although there's many more, the famous Lucy. Probably the most famous, widely accepted partial skeleton discovered in 1974, presented as our ancestor. They got displays in all kinds of museums. It turns out, after a spectrograph, that the bones were that of a chimpanzee. And also, the bones were not even found together, but scattered all over the place. In fact, the knee they used for her was found a mile away. These are all the bones that they have. They used that to draw this. They used this and their imagination to create this. still in the St. Louis Zoo, but it is an absolute fraud. It is fake. They even put feet on her, and they didn't even find feet bones. It's made up. It's not real. And there's several more of these that I don't even have time to get into today, of these missing links that are still used today to try to tell you that you evolved from a monkey. And if you think that's bad, take a look at this video.
A second Chinese fossil was brought to him by a scientist from National Geographic magazine. This fossil, called Archaeoraptor, was purported to be an unusual missing link which would, once and for all, prove that birds evolved from dinosaurs. It had a long featherless tail, similar to dinosaurs, but it also had feathers and a bird-like body, giving the appearance of two different animals blended together, just as Darwin predicted. As Dr. Rowe carefully scanned the Chinese specimen and watched the cross-sectional images appear on the computer screen, he noticed something was very wrong. Dr. Rowe discovered that 26 fossil bones from 5 animals, including a dinosaur and a bird, had been fraudulently constructed to make a transitional fossil.
And that was the thing that caught our attention first. We could find no verifiable fit between the tail, the most spectacular part of the specimen. We could find no verifiable fit between that piece and any of the other parts of the block. And we found other irregularities as well. Even though it seems to fit tightly in here, when you look at it in cross-section, you can see that this piece and this piece have no verifiable association with the pieces around them. The next thing happened were the 2 shin bones were glued in. And likewise, these have no verifiable associations. The next thing that happened is that the foot was glued on, and I say foot rather than feet because this is a single foot. This is a slab and counter slab that were split and separated and glued in place to make it look as though there were right and left feet there. It's a clever use of materials. You know, if you're limited, you take a single foot and turn it into 2, you know? Very, very creative.
This schematic diagram shows how many different fossils and rocks were used to create Archaeoraptor. Each color represents a different type of rock and a different type of animal. Dr. Rowe reported his startling discoveries to the National Geographic scientist. Yet soon afterwards, the unexpected happened. National Geographic held a press conference announcing the discovery of Archaeoraptor, failing to disclose the fossil as a fraud.
And we provided the data and our interpretation to the representatives of Geographic, and the scientist in charge, as he walked out of the building, his last comment to me was, well, all of these Chinese things have been fiddled with. But he understood that there were profound questions surrounding this, and we'd been brought in as consultants simply to scan the specimen, and which we did. We presented our interpretation, original copies of the data to all parties, and it was a total shock when the news conference came that they were announcing that this was a valid specimen.
3 months after the original CAT scan was performed, National Geographic published its story about the discovery of Archaeoraptor. The article claimed that Archaeoraptor was a flying dinosaur, a missing link, and the best evidence that birds evolved from dinosaurs, but failed to reveal the serious discrepancies found by Dr. Rowe.
You think this is the only one? Printed in National Geographic. A known, proven fraud. My friends, I call this talk today Darwin's Deception, because we are not dealing with a simple mistake. We are not dealing with people that are just making misunderstandings about the evidence that they see. If we were dealing with real science, with the real scientific method, Darwin's hypothesis should have been abandoned long ago. Yet it persists and is even called a theory, which, if you remember from last week, a theory is supposed to be backed up by evidence, not just a guess. What I showed you today is just a small fraction of the efforts of many to perpetuate this known lie, and they are not afraid to publish outright forgeries to maintain the myth. Why? Why? Are all these scientists just evil? Are they just blind? Are they stupid? Why would so many intelligent people, hold on to this belief in the face of so much proof against it and such a lack of observational proof for it? And why would so many intentionally lie to keep it alive? Well, Jesus answered this question 2,000 years ago. In John chapter 3, right after he says, God so loved the world, sent his only Son, he says this. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. The light is the truth about God's word. Jesus is the truth himself, but people do not want to know the truth. In fact, they hate it. Have you ever noticed when just debating over this stuff or reading what's written, if you ever read comments and stuff on these various articles, generally they don't quite have the same kind of respect for us as we do for them. Typically it's derogatory comments, childish names, outright, you're stupid, just hateful things. They spend less time debating the facts and more time just telling us how stupid and ignorant we are. In fact, when Bill Nye was going to debate Ken Ham, if you've ever heard about that, Bill Nye actually got a lot of flack for even engaging in the debate with him because it was like, oh, you're going to give credence to their argument. They don't even want to talk to us because we're stupid and ignorant. Why? Why when we're showing scientific evidence? It's the same reason I said last week. People would prefer to believe in the Big Bang evolution model because the end result of that may be that your life is meaningless, has no purpose, and no value, but at least you're not accountable to the Almighty God. If I came from goo, I don't have to answer to you. If you repeat a lie long enough, loud enough, and often enough, it may just become the truth. This is exactly what Paul was talking about in the passage of Ephesians that we covered all through the We series. If you recall, it says, of course, my responsibility as your pastor is to equip you and build you up and tell you the truth. Why? It says in verse 14, so then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. That's what this is. It's believable, not plausible. Believable, because you want to believe it. So what do we do? Oh yeah, later in this letter, Paul reminds us that our battle is not against flesh and blood. We are in a spiritual battle, my friends, and our enemy is known as what? The father of lies who deceives the whole world. Is it any surprise that something so obviously untrue when you really look at it, as good to you, evolution, has made its way into the hearts and minds of seemingly everyone and is being taught to our children as fact, and many in the church even buy into it? So what do? Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Do your own research. Read from both sides of the debate and decide for yourself whether the creation account stands up or the evolution account. I just showed you a small, tiny little bit today. I just encourage you that as you do this research, because it matters, as I'll say in a minute, it matters what you believe about this. I encourage you to look for observable evidence rather than cartoons drawn from a tooth. All right? Can you promise me that? All right. Now, you may think that Darwin himself was just an honest scientist looking for the truth, and this is to happen to be what he came up with. It's not his fault that he was wrong. Well, let me read to you a quote that he said in his book immediately before the sentence I shared with you at the beginning of his thesis. He says, although much remains obscure and will long remain obscure, I can entertain no doubt after the most deliberate study and dispassionate judgment of which I am capable, that the view which most naturalists until recently entertained, and which I formerly entertained, namely, that each species has been independently created, is erroneous. He wasn't just looking for a solution, my friends. He was looking for an alternative solution to the one he had already been given in the Bible. Now, whatever you conclude from this talk or your own research, there is one thing you cannot avoid. And that is the conclusion that we came to last week. You see, because if this evolution thing is true, then you are not specially created. Then your life has no purpose, no meaning, no value. You're an accident. You don't even have free will. Your whole life is an illusion caused by chemical reactions, and you will have no significance ever. And not only that, but if this is really true, if this evolution is really true, then no human life has any value. In fact, it is this belief in evolution and the survival of the fittest that prompted Adolf Hitler to try to exterminate the Jews. He wanted to create a master race, did he not? He wanted to exterminate what he considered the lowest level of human evolution. And 6 million Jews died because of it. But that's in the past. That can't happen today. Not anymore. No one thinks that way anymore. We'll say that to the 57 million unborn babies that have been murdered in the United States since 1973 and happen every minute of every day. And you've seen the videos on Facebook if you're brave enough to watch them. And people argue about health care for women. It's okay to justify the killing of unborn babies. Why? Because of this thing called embryology, which I couldn't even get into today, but it's this idea, proven false, proven a fraud long ago, this idea that in the womb you're actually just going through your various evolutionary stages, and by the time you get out you're a human, but until then you're not. So we can kill them for convenience sake. You think this belief has no consequences? Do you think it doesn't matter which one of these is true? Because evolution says life has no value, no purpose, not yours, not anyone, just kill or be killed, survival of the fittest. But if the creation account is correct, which I believe it is, then you were made on purpose, for a purpose, by a God who loves you enough to send his Son to die for you. And all he asks for in return is your trust. Not indentured servitude. Not following a bunch of rules, which is why they don't want to believe it, because they think that's true. Never have any fun. Just your trust, and he'll take care of the rest. You can decide what you believe. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, this is a big topic. And there's so much out there. There's so many lies, so many falsehoods that we've just bought into because we've been taught it from childhood. I pray that you just open our eyes, you open our hearts to see your truth. It's your truth that sets us free. Truth, it matters. And Lord, I just pray that you convict us, that you make us do the research. You make us look and stop just drinking the Kool-Aid and believe in everything that everyone out there says just because they say it louder and with threats. Help us to stand strong on your word and help us to trust you even when it's countercultural. And we give you praise and we give you glory. In Jesus' name we pray.